It's May the 3rd, 2019. This is 508, a show about Worcester. This is Brendan Malick and the fan favorite.
Mike, you're holding your notebook upside down. How are you actually reading anything if your notebook's upside down?
I'm Mike Benedetti, the one that you love to hate. You know, Brendan, Jeff Barnard used to say that there's no top story in Worcester, or at least that a lot of weeks there was no top story in Worcester. But I feel like this week there's so many top stories in Worcester. There's like multiple competing top stories in Worcester.
So which are we going to start with?
I think of at least two that seem vying for the number one slot to me. One is that in the last couple of weeks we've seen the passing of two legendary educators and activists in the city. Paul Ropp has died, and a good friend of mine, Michael True, has died. His intelligence, diligence, generosity, and kindness will not be forgotten by those who knew him. His funeral is today in Minnesota, and there's going to be a memorial event for him in Worcester on June the 1st at Mechanics Hall. And this is sort of funny because, you know, Mike, for 50 years was a peace activist in the city of Worcester and really just like did it 100%. And so he, went afoul of the powers that be many a time, and he was always like, I will get my revenge eventually. They will have my funeral at Mechanics Hall. So it's great that they're going to do the event there. Also, I'm sure that there'll be a billion people who want to show up for the Mike True Memorial. Yeah. So it's a good venue for that. Mike was always a very funny guy, as well as a very hard worker, and like I said, a very kind and generous person. I guess the other thing that feels to me like a top story this week is that after 38 years, Konnie Lukes is not running for re-election.
Yeah.
To public office in Worcester.
I would like to say that I called this a year ago, Mike.
Did you say that she wasn't running again? You probably did say that.
I did. It was because she took her bumper sticker. The big pink Luke's bumper sticker came off her car like a year ago. I remember seeing her getting coffee one day. It said hi, and her and her husband Jim, and I walked outside and I realized that it was the first time in the 20 or so years that I have known Konnie that there wasn't a bumper sticker on her car. And I almost thought about going back in to say, like, hey, sticker, it looks like someone stole a sticker off your car. And then it dawned on me, like, oh, maybe she took it off. And it hasn't been there for a year.
We should probably talk about Konnie more later in the show, and I'm sure we will have many an episode where we revisit the legacy of Konnie B. Lukes.
We got to have her on, I think, is what we need to do. We need to we're going to have Konnie on and do a Konnie retrospective on 508. I'm serious. We totally should.
Yes. I feel like even though politically we may differ from her on many things, in some ways her attitude seems like a reflection of our own attitude towards a lot of these things.
We'll get there someday.
Just sort of being contrary. I really love that in Walter Bird's article, there was about her not running for re-election, there was this sentence: the word contrarian has often been used to describe Lukes' role on city council, a description she has long protested. And I feel like that's the ultimate contrarian move, to be like, if you're a contrarian, no, I'm not a contrarian.
Yeah, you're a contrarian.
You got to double check it, because then you got to be like, well, maybe you're not a contrarian. And then if she's like, no, I am a contrarian, then you know she is the true contrarian. We'll talk about Konnie a little bit later. This week we've got news about who's running for public office. We've got HOLDEN MAN news, housing news, app news, transit news, church news, weed news, surveillance news, culture news. And like I said, probably even more to say about Konnie. Brendan, I went down to City Hall today to see who has pulled papers for public office in the city of Worcester.
And there are now more people running for public office than there are registered voters within the city of Worcester.
I went down to City Hall and made a copy in my own handwriting of who's pulled papers. Now this includes some people like Konnie Lukes who have said, even though I pulled papers, I actually decided against it.
Right. Just wanted one last set.
Yeah, so we've got 21 people.
It's going to be like her high school yearbook. She's collecting all the signatures from folks that just wants to remember that have signed over the years.
We've got 21 people running for 6 slots on the at-large city council. We've got 16 people running for 6 slots on the school committee. And we've been, people have been joking a lot about there being so many people running for school committee, but there are still fewer people who've pulled papers for school committee than at-large city council.
Right.
To me, the big news, even though the big news, it seems like, has been this thing about school committee, the big news that I haven't seen mentioned anywhere is that at most 2 of the district council races will be contested. That we have nobody running as a challenger in District 1, nobody running as a challenger in District 2, Davis Kayasare running as a challenger in District 3, although he's also pulled papers for at-large council, so I don't know what he's going to end up running for. Can you run for both? Maybe. I read the candidate guidelines, and it didn't go so deep into the weeds as maybe to say that, but it didn't mention anything.
I think they just assume logically that nobody would want that pain machine twice, so they...
There's nothing in the rule book that says you can't be on the city council and on the school committee both. Nobody pulled papers for both of them, but why not, guys? Nobody's running against Sarai, and John Haynes Honeycutt has pulled papers against Matt Wally in District 5. But that's two people who, I guess John Haynes has already turned in enough signatures, so he's definitely on there. Davis Kayasare, I don't know. Still, it's not, basically we got 2 more weeks to go. It's like May the 14th is the last day you can
My birthday.
turn in signatures.
So I'm going to celebrate is by just standing in City Hall and congratulating people.
Yeah, I mean, so there's 25 possible challengers. Again, this includes people who have already said they're actually not going to run.
Right.
They're doing take-backs, which are totally allowed before they're actually allowed up until Election Day, I guess, take-backs.
Yeah. It just complicates things unnecessarily.
Yeah. So there's 25 possible challengers. I think that there's fewer than 25 weeks until the election. So if we wanted to talk to every single challenger, we would actually have to
have started
already started a couple weeks ago.
All right.
But I think that probably since some people are not going to run for election, I think we're still okay. But we should actually start pretty soon.
Yes.
Have you looked at the list of who's running?
No, not really.
Well,
There's just so many names, and it's like, yeah.
I haven't read a bunch of stuff off of a piece of paper in a while in this show, and I know it's always really popular, so I'm going to do it again today. So City Council at large, you've got all your incumbents have pulled papers. Gary Rosen, Tony Economo, Christian King.
But Tony's not an incumbent.
He's not an incumbent. You're right. Oh, he didn't run last time, but he's running. He's rerunning.
He's rerunning.
Was he district before?
Yeah, he was District 1, Sean Rose's
Right.
currency.
Okay, so I'm totally confused. So Gary Rosen, Christian King.
Well, he just bought us an extra week. No, we just lost.
We lost a week.
Oh, now we're behind.
Konnie Lukes, Joe Petty, Morris A. Bergman, Kate Toomey. All of them have pulled papers to run for re-election. The challengers running at council at large are Tony Economo, Donna Colorio, former school committee member from back in the day, running for council at large, Evan Corrigan, Awura Kwaku Sarkodie. I should also say this is the beginning of where I need to start apologizing for saying people's names wrong. I do apologize. Jonathan Rodriguez, Atel Hajii, Paul M. DePaulo, Ralph A. Tissione Jr., Bill Coleman. I talked to Bill Coleman about this yesterday. He gave me his business card. Somebody said to Bill Coleman at this public meeting I was at yesterday, they said, since Connie's not running, that's a space that's opened up on the council. And Bill Coleman said, there's 6 spaces that have opened up on the council every election.
Well played, Bill Coleman.
Well played, Bill Coleman. Joe Brignola, James L. Bedard, Benjamin B. Roberts, Davis K. Asare, Jesse G. Gibson, and Sean Peretti Noon. All of these people have pulled papers for at-large city council.
Well, I wish them all luck.
On the school committee, let me double-check that all of our incumbents have pulled papers. Diana Biancaria, Molly McCullough, John Manfredo. I know it was you, Manfredo. You broke my heart. You broke my heart. Jack Foley, Dante Comparetto, Brian A. O'Connell. So all of them have pulled papers for re-election, I guess. Also on the list is challengers Kara Berg Powers, Laura Clancy, Chantal Bethier, Jeremo Kamora, John Trobaugh, Ruth Rodriguez Fay, Tracy O'Connell Novick, former school committee member from back in the day, also running for re-election, Hermone T. McConnor, Mary Mullaney, and Mariah Martinez.
I thought Mary decided not to.
She did, but that doesn't mean that you're not on the list.
No, she's still. We're keeping them on the list.
This is people. These are people. Right. We've seen this in the past. This is very poor behavior, and I'm not saying that any of these people would be guilty of such behavior, but we have seen people change their mind at the last second.
Right. I get you.
Right. The day before election day, basically being like, "I will not run. I will not serve if elected." So I quit.
Yeah.
It's certainly possible that any of these people on May the 14th could just turn in a bunch of signatures and get on the ballot.
Sure.
And again, like Sean Rose is running for re-election in District 1, Candy Carlson is running for re-election in District 2, George Russell is running for re-election in District 3, Soraya Rivera is running for re-election in District 4, Matt Wally is running for re-election in District 5, and only in District 3 and District 5 has anybody even pulled papers. And I would think that if you're serious enough, if you're going to run a serious campaign, you're going to have pulled papers way before now.
Right.
Why no district challengers?
All the attention is at large. People are thinking big, Mike.
But you have the same amount of power. I mean,
don't tell anyone that.
It's easier. It's
Stick
a
with the
cheaper
narrative,
race
Mike.
to run.
Stick with the narrative.
It's way cheaper. I mean,
You have a few thousand less doors to knock. Yeah, I mean, it's basically like if you're running at large, you're missing the point entirely. When there's 400 million other people, anyone who's living in 1, 2, or 4 that is running at large. Why?
I don't know.
Yeah, people love titles, man.
Yeah, well, I mean, and I can understand too. Like, you have that sense of like, well, you know, if enough of the incumbents get sick or something, like the race softens up a lot. You know, but again, like it's like, well, like, hey, if if Sean Rose, God forbid, gets sick, your District 1, if he has to drop out for some personal reason, District 1,
anarchy.
There you go. No,
Anarchy
if you're already on the
District 1.
ballot for District 1, then there you go.
But there is no one on the ballot. That's what I'm saying. There's anarchy.
Maybe I'll move to District 1 and get my name on the ballot. Holden Man news. Holden Man gets probation for running illegal gambling operation.
You got to build this wall, Mike.
I know it.
And make them pay for it.
Housing news. The Baker administration continues
Lester pay for it.
Continues to push what they're calling a housing choice bill, which is really, I think, a zoning reform bill. This would push communities to make certain zoning changes by making it so that if you agreed that like one of these 5 zoning changes is something that you wanted, your local guys, I guess, could pass this by a majority rather than a supermajority. Currently, you have to get a supermajority to pass a zoning change.
I have no idea what you just said.
Yeah, I mean, I think it basically makes it more likely that you're going to do one of these things. Like the things that you could enact is you could have, this is their bullet points, building mixed-use multifamily and starter homes and adopting 40R smart growth zoning in town centers and near transit. That's one bullet point. Allowing the development of accessory dwelling units or in-law apartments. That's 2. Approving smart growth or starter home districts that put housing near existing activity centers. Granting increased density through a special permit process. Allowing for the transfer of development rights and enacting natural resource protection zoning. And reducing parking requirements and dimensional requirements such as minimum lot sizes. I mean, this is all stuff that we've already like started doing in Worcester. So I feel like this is not really impactful on us. But it's interesting that this is something they're doing statewide. There's actually a good statistic here that was meaningful to me, which is that decades ago, we used to add 50,000 housing units a year in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, and these days it's more like 10,000, which is less.
It is less. It is a smaller number.
And the Baker administration says that their goal would be 135,000 new units by 2025, which would be something like 27,000 a year. So you're kind of tripling, for at least for 5 years, you'd be tripling the rate of adding new units. Now, some of these, like, for example, making in-law apartments legal, like, that's actually, like, a super fast and cheap way to add a housing unit, is to say, hey, guess what, my garage is an apartment, or my attic's an apartment, or whatever it ends up being.
And this is, to be fair, one of those areas that makes sense, right? Because like this, New England is full of like things like carriage houses and whatnot that are actually perfectly suited to be in-law apartments, or even just not forget your in-laws. Maybe you hate your in-laws. Maybe you just want to rent it out on Airbnb. Or whatever. Just take in some tenants. Like you should be able to do that.
Yeah, there's some pretty
make it a nightmare.
There's some pretty good garages in the world. I'm going to skip over app news for now and move on to transit news because here's another thing with numbers. Did you know that the private Boston Service Railroad Company hopes to operate a passenger train between Providence and Woonsocket by 2020 and extend that to Worcester by 2021?
I did not know that, but
yes, this is true. This got in the news recently because they've just done like another round of offering bonds to the public or some way of you to invest in that. Eventually, their line would go all the way to Concord. They don't have a detailed breakdown on their website, but by 2020, the plan would be to have 1,000 to 2,000 daily riders.
That would be
by
helpful.
2025. I'm sorry, it would be. The plan would be to have 1,000 to 2,000 daily riders by 2025 and 3,000 to 5,000 daily riders by 2027. As a point of comparison, 1,500 people take the T from Worcester to Boston each weekday. So this would be sort of like a T-level railroad would be the initial plan within 5 years.
It'll give it an opportunity for all of the former Pawtucket Red Sox and former Hasbro employees, fans, and employees to make their way up to Worcester.
So I saw this thing that they were going to try to get Hasbro to relocate from Providence to Worcester.
I just love seeing a big picture of Mr. Potato Head in news stories. That just made me really, really happy all week.
I mean, thinking about that seems insane. Like, why would, Worcester is effectively a third the size of Providence, a quarter the size of Providence, way smaller than Providence. So why would you move a big company from one to the other? But they'd move the baseball team up here, so I guess anything is possible.
Sure.
What do you think the chances are of this happening?
I'm just expecting to be surprised by everything these days. And if Mr. Potato Head can come to Worcester, it's just going to be a win for us all. I mean, it's been years since we lost the Abdow's Big Boy statue that used to be down at Webster Square. I don't even know where. I think it got stolen at one point in time.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know that it had ever been located. But a giant Mr. Potato Head statue, I think, would be a suitable replacement.
Could we get Star Wars guys?
That's a great question.
Boba Fett?
Maybe.
I feel like he's a very Worcester Star Wars character. Church news. Unfortunately, this is another week where Worcester Church news, which means Worcester Church demolition news. There will be another hearing coming up soon on whether the Roman Catholic Diocese of Worcester can demolish Our Lady of Mount Carmel Church and sell the land. This is a preservation effort I have been a part of, by the way. Full disclosure. At one point, it looked like this might not happen because it looked like the Commonwealth had given the land to the church for like educational and religious purposes,
right?
And so that the church couldn't sell it to somebody unless they were actually going to use it for educational and religious purposes. And if they sold it to somebody for some other purpose, it might revert back to the state. In which case, the diocese would be less enthusiastic to just give the land back to the state. But at least the part where the church is sitting has been clarified is actually from a previous deal with a private landowner.
Yeah, the deed restriction was on the parking lot.
Right. So the people who want to really preserve like the Italian American Cultural Center or that parking lot maybe have a good argument here, but people who want to preserve the church, it's like forget it.
I guess what it really does though is even further call into question. Now I think the argument would be from a really slick lawyer. Well, we got to get rid of this church even faster because of the deed restriction. You've been violating the deed restriction by using this space as a parking lot. There is no educational or religious unless they're doing services out in the parking lot.
Well,
and you can't possibly have a church without adequate parking. That would be in violation of our zoning overlay.
I mean, you're using it as a parking lot for the Italian American Cultural Center, and that.
But they're
and
two
like
separate
the church
parcels.
hall.
So you're just using it as a parking lot.
The church hall is a separate parcel from the parking lot?
I'm actually being sarcastic, but it seems like the deed restriction that everyone's been all up in arms about is attached to a parking lot, not attached to the actual church.
Yes.
So it throws if the argument was one thing, then we kind of have to take the inverse of that argument as being the actual thing if we find out we weren't making the right argument in the first place.
I should also mention that the Diocese of Worcester, every time there's an article about this and the reporters are like, isn't there a deed restriction that's going to keep you from selling this? The Diocese of Worcester's response has been, no.
I honestly,
and they never elaborate.
I'm not a lawyer at all, but the whole idea of a deed restriction stopping the demolition it strikes me as a complete idiot, as utter nonsense. Like, the deed restriction says the property can only be used for educational or religious purposes. So knocking the building down has no impact on that.
Right. I mean, I think that would just be a question of what are the incentives for the diocese. Like, the diocese would like to have some money, and the diocese owns this piece of land, and so the diocese and the parish, is way fewer people than there used to be, and the building has been falling apart for decades. So it's like the diocese has every reason, unless it cares about that parish specifically, has every reason to say, let's liquidate this parish, and people can go to church, the adjacent parish. And we'll get some money. But if you suddenly say, well, you can't get any money, then the diocese is like, well, I guess we could enrage,
But they could get some money. I mean, they could sell it to a school. They could, they could sell it to a higher ed institution. Maybe Mass College of Pharmacy could use it as their parking lot.
That's true. I guess that's true. That you're just pushing them to say, like,
what are your plans?
We need a nonprofit in there rather than like a for-profit or apartments or whatever.
Well, it could be for-profit education. It could be a cult. You could have a for-profit religious institution or whatnot.
Okay.
I mean, it just struck me as a really odd angle to take, that because it was like trying to force the hand of the diocese to say this is who we're selling to. But I can't really think of many other instances where you would need to disclose business dealings in advance of your business dealings being complete.
It is a little bit weird in that way.
It was a weak argument, Mike. That's all I'm saying.
It is a little bit weird in that way. I want to talk about app. Well, I do want to talk about app news. Here's an article in the TNG. New app provides info on recovery mental health resources in Worcester. This is a collaboration between the city's Department of Health and Human Services and some students at WPI to make this app, which is basically a directory of human services in Worcester. And my initial response to this would be, isn't this a web page? Except that I feel like I have enough amateur experience in human services in the city to know that there is a huge amount of human services in the city of Worcester, and making a complete and coherent list of them has actually been an ongoing struggle. like for a long time, the Homeless Outreach Advocacy Project had the one true accurate list of like soup kitchens, for example, in the city of Worcester.
Sure.
But everybody else would distribute them. So you might go to the library and you would get a list which was provided by, I don't know, some library employee, the city Department of Health, I don't know who, but it would not be accurate. It would be years out of date. And that plenty of organizations would give you a list that would be years out of date, but there was like the one organization who actually was on top of it to have like the right paper list.
Mm-hmm.
So I do like the idea of the city kind of saying like we're going to invest some money in this to just make people really care about this particular list, and maybe everybody will care about this list. Like I looked at it and I saw errors involving organizations that I volunteer with. So I emailed the city to say, hey, like correct this information. I don't think I ever would have emailed them otherwise, because I would have just been like, this stuff changes year to year. Like,
sure.
But I think the other reason why, at least theoretically, this app could be helpful is because I've definitely talked to people who are like, I became homeless in Worcester this morning. And I talked to a social worker and I'm trying to understand, where can I sleep tonight? Where can I sleep this evening? And I told people just like the most basic information of like, here are the shelters, here's the deal with meals Saturday morning or whatever in the city of Worcester. And they're just like, thank you so much. This is so helpful. Like it's been so crazy to be thrown into this situation. There is so much available and it is potentially very hard to negotiate.
Yeah.
So I do like the idea of saying like there's going to be a list and it's going to be like in an app form, because a lot of people have smartphones, but plenty of people run out of data or whatever, to just be like, you go to your social worker's office, you stick the app on your phone, now you got all the info. If you run out of data, doesn't matter. The app is still going to have that list built into it. Like an app is sort of a weirdly roundabout way to basically put a PDF on your phone, searchable PDF on your phone, but it is a way to do that.
Yeah. Seems like a perfectly reasonable effort.
Yes. Anyway, this app is called Stigma Free Worcester, which is a little bit of a confusing name. And again, you know, a lot of these projects don't work out, so maybe this ends up not working out. But at least the idea of it is theoretically a helpful thing. And I'm always excited when the city is doing stuff like creating apps and whatever. I think the city has still not followed up on Kate Toomey's suggestion of a decade ago that there should be some city podcasts. But making an app feels like in the same spirit as that.
City's got plenty of podcasts, Mike.
Brent crude oil is $71 a barrel, down 5% on the week. Bitcoin is $5,700, up 11% on the week, and down only 40% on the year. Bitcoin, man, it's had a good couple of months.
It has had a good couple of months.
Yeah, I mean, at least it's worth something, which is more than I would have guessed. I don't know why. I mean, Brent crude oil is down to $71 a barrel, but that's actually a bit high for recent years of Brent crude oil, so it could certainly fall a little bit more, and it wouldn't be a big deal on the price of oil, I don't think, if I understand the price of oil correctly. We got a little weed news. We got a little surveillance news. Yeah, you're looking at the app, Stigma Free Worcester.
There it is. I'm going to install it.
The Worcester Planning Board has approved a couple of more weed stores. Brendan, why are we so behind the curve on this? Why didn't we have all this stuff approved like months ago, years ago?
Yeah, I'm still torn on this, how I feel about this one, because it's there is really no good reason why this shouldn't have all been rolled out at once. It's created a bit of an artificial drive, and I think it's also lost a lot of people in terms of interest. Just keeping the sort of marketing flow going that a lot of these newer businesses are going to rely upon. But at the same time, this is one of those areas too that you look at some of the states that went like whole hog, like no holds barred. I think Oregon is one where, I think it's Oregon, like weed doesn't have value. Bitcoin is worth more than weed in Oregon, right? Like Bitcoin at its rock bottom, day one, was worth more than weed. Like you can't give away ounces of good weed because there are just so many growers, right? So it's market forces have clearly have taken over, like the economics 101 stuff. You've got too many people producing, and there's no barriers to entry, so the market's just flooded with really, really cheap weed. Massachusetts, I think we've got like a really good kind of layout long term where slow rollout, prices will gradually come down, and then you'll hit that sweet spot where the state stops seeing revenue, income via revenue. And that's when you'll see like licenses capped completely, and you'll start seeing consolidation and shuffling or whatnot. In the city, though, it's just a bummer. Like, yeah, I mean,
It feels like if people are going to be wandering around the state smoking weed, they ought to smoking Worcester weed.
well, we have growing around here, so yeah, I mean that's fine too. You can
guess
keep it
they
local, but it's just a bummer that we just had our first legal spot on the recreational side open up this week. Good Chemistry down on Harrison
Yes.
Street in the Canal District. I mean
They have a nice sign.
They've got nice everything. They're nice people who all came to visit us from Colorado and stuck around. That's where the business operates out of, and they're living in the city, loving the city, doing a good thing down there. But yeah, I don't understand why anyone is making it hard for this industry. Get over it. We're all having a nice time. Join us.
Here's a fun project some Belgian guys did. They looked at a specific computer program that processed images and found images of people. This is, a person spotting image processing program, and they came up with an abstract image that if you were holding a printout of this abstract image, the program does not recognize you as a human being. So here it is. This only works on this one specific program, hilariously enough. But if I was in front of this program, it would be like, that's a guy. This isn't a guy. Actually, it's recognizing my face. We have a facial recognition thing on this camera. It's not being fooled by this image. Oh well, alas. Anyway, that's just sort of a fun thing.
This app's actually kind of cool, Mike. This could come in handy for me in my day-to-day.
I mean, there's a lot of places in the city to I'll tell you this, both to volunteer and to get some stuff. Like if you know somebody who needs some stuff, like if you know somebody who's like having a problem with furniture, clothing, food, housing, whatever, there is a lot of stuff in the city of Worcester compared to most places in the country. Doesn't mean that is still not a big stressful situation to be dealing with, but it could make it a lot less painful. So whenever you find yourself, if you find you're not going to have this problem, but if people in the city who don't have a lot of support from friends and family, especially, find themselves homeless, find themselves hungry, you can get through it for sure. At least a couple of weeks, it can make things a lot easier on you. Did you ever know Michael True? I know we interviewed him on this show.
I will say yes, but not in any capacity that I would. Not well.
I want to talk about this guy, Michael True. So Mike True, was originally from Oklahoma, and he moved to Worcester with his family in 1965 to teach English at Assumption College. Mm-hmm. And he taught at Assumption until 2000 or something. He taught English and taught peace studies. And very soon after him arriving in the city, he got involved in the anti-Vietnam War movement in the city and was one of the people involved with that. And there were a lot of old-time Worcesterites and others, young Worcesterites, who were also involved in that movement. And he would always speak very fondly of this. There was a very active movement to provide accurate draft counseling for young men in Worcester. Mm-hmm. And this was sort of like one way that people opposed the war, because I guess that the draft boards usually didn't have people who understood draft law very well, and that there were frequently reasons that you could legitimately be excused from the draft, but how would you ever find that information out? How would you ever be counseled by that? And the answer is that, Worcester clergy and laity concerned against the war would draft counsel you and tell you, because you're in such and such a situation, you should be able to get out of it. So tell the draft board this, and if they say no, tell it to them again, and eventually they'll get the picture. So he was involved with that, he's and then just stayed involved in peace activism in the city of Worcester. I would say until his later years, always a very optimistic guy. In his later years, I never talked to him about this question of are we in the wrong timeline, but I think he would have loved that framing. He would have been like, I kind of think we are in the wrong timeline. But very optimistic person, very kind person, very generous person, very diligent person. Raised a bunch of kids, taught a bunch of students, did a bunch of activism, every kind of activism, traveling around the world, risking arrest, writing a ton of stuff. Just spent a huge amount of sweat and stress around getting the Telegram and Gazette editorial board to write his op-eds unchanged. Yeah. This was frequently a conversation with him, which I always sort of felt like, how can you possibly care about this? You're doing so many other things that seem so important to me. How is this even on your radar? But it has to be on somebody's radar, and he's a person whose radar it was on. To be like, there's not good anti-Iraq war op-eds running in the Telegram and Gazette in 2002. I got to write them and I got to push them.
Right. And he did, consistently.
He did. So, this is the thing. It's there's plenty of opinionated professors in the world, and you can't just be like, oh yeah, there's an opinionated professor, let's celebrate them. But again, this is somebody who being an opinionated professor was a tiny slice of what he did, and he just did a huge amount of work, and he did it for 50 years, and he made the city of Worcester better in a lot of different ways. Very active in the local literary community, publishing poetry, journals, and whatever. He himself wrote and published a ton of books. He himself mentored a ton of people. He himself was generous with a ton of people.
Yeah.
Co-founder of the Center for Nonviolent Solutions, which continues to exist in the city of Worcester and provide information on the youth to the school youth of Worcester about how they can do like nonviolent solutions to conflicts in their life.
One of the things that I always wanted to ask him about, I never got the chance to, obviously, but maybe it's better that I didn't. There's this really neat but small passage in Fear and Loathing on the Campaign Trail, 1972, Hunter S. Thompson's sort of like accounting of the 1972 presidential election.
Yes.
And there's this bit about being in Worcester. And so Hunter S. Thompson came to Worcester for it was like an early rally for the Democratic Party and whatnot, but it was like it was in primary season, if I recall.
Okay.
So he does this great job of it was at Assumption College. He does this great job of kind of painting this picture of all of like the, amped up like college-aged activists and like their sort of like young adult mentors and whatnot, and putting all these like soldiers in motion and what have you. It was just a funny sort of thing to read through, because I've always, in my time in politics, always just kind of tried to envision like who were those activists that like are now older folks, right? That maybe just like the quiet old person sitting in the corner and whatnot. But in 1972 was the rabble rouser who was catching Hunter S. Thompson's attention during what ended up being one of the most important presidential cycles of you and I's lifetime, but just, well, actually, it was before us. So, yeah, just the post-World War II era, but definitely the sort of thing that put a stamp on the Vietnam era.
A lot of those activists have passed on.
Yeah.
I have in my box of videotapes I should digitize and do something with. A bunch of interviews with Dan Dick, who was very involved with the peace movement, who has since died. A bunch of interviews with Mike True, who is, has since died. And we've put videos of Mike True certainly on this show talking about stuff, but I have plenty of stories that I just need to get out of my desk drawer.
We should do that. That would actually be a good project for throwing some stuff up on YouTube.
He always talks specifically about that Thurston Taylor, who was the head librarian, was very active in this. And that in some ways Thurston Taylor was in a similar situation. When I was talking before about Mike, running afoul of the powers that be. Like Thurston, he was like very much on like a first name basis with all of the power players and very much a part of that scene in Worcester. And also like a weird pacifist librarian, who was like leading protests and whatevers against things, and I think enjoyed that kind of dual life.
Yeah.
It's like maybe like the one peacenik radical to be like eating lunch at the Worcester Club on a regular basis or whatever. You
do kind of need to play, I think, to be truly effective in anything, though, right? If you can't tie together like threads between groups of people, then what are you really accomplishing other than just reinforcing your own beliefs amongst your own people? Like
I said with Mike and his sweating things around the Telegram Gazette op-ed pages, like somebody should do that. It should not be me,
right?
But that's not a useless thing
at all.
Luckily, it also shouldn't be 100 people, but there should definitely be 2 or 3 people who are really focused on that as part of their work.
When it becomes 100 people, then we call that Facebook.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm always inspired by those earlier years of Worcester activists. Like I feel like, especially in recent years, I just see Worcester activists just like either working quietly behind the scenes for long periods of time and accomplishing things that way, or just blowing up spectacularly. Those are kind of the two modes that it feels like people have operated in the city, at least maybe for the last 10 years.
That visible middle ground where people are constantly reminded that you exist without being totally threatened by you is an important thing.
Yeah, maybe it doesn't work. Maybe this is why people have abandoned it. I don't know. Oh, last weekend was the Worcester VegFest.
How'd that go?
It went great. I haven't looked at anything. I don't know anything about the numbers. I was one of the volunteers, so theoretically I could get the numbers. My sense is that there were fewer vendors than in previous years. I don't know if there were fewer attendees or not. It was less crowded, which is only a good thing. Like, that's a festival which absolutely should, like, half the number of vendors available and like double the fees that charge them to make up for it, because it used to be painfully crowded, like so crowded that you could not, like, it was not really a festival. It was just a bunch of people slammed together in an elevator for long periods of time. And so like there's a certain capacity that beyond which like your festival's not functional. And it was kind of bumping up against that the last few years, and this year did not feel that way. Like I was standing out on the festival floor the whole time handing out Happiness Pony issues, and it got crowded at times, but there was never that time where it felt like we were just all jammed into an elevator and waiting for somebody to please God get out so that we can all take a breath.
Is Happiness Pony vegan?
No, not in any sort of doctrinaire way. No, I mean VegFest people are involved with it, but
I just didn't know like inks and paper. I don't know much about the process. I know there's a big push in inks for tattooing, for like vegan tattoo inks and what. I didn't know if you're using vegan inks on Happiness Pony.
I don't know. I mean, speaking about looking back at the long.
Did I just ruin something for Happiness Pony, and now you're not going to be invited back to VegFest?
I mean, this just kind of reminds me of my own early days as a vegan 20 years ago. Whenever I was intensely interested in questions like this, or like. These shoes the tops are vegan. Is the rubber vegan?
Right.
Is there bone char which is used in the process of making white sugar?
Right.
The answer is yes. So that for a long time you could buy turbinado or slightly brown sugar that didn't have bone char in it. These days I don't even know. The answer is that the amount of bones that are being used to produce the sugar that you produce in a year is probably like a tablespoon of bones.
Right.
And in the big picture,
there's more bugs.
It has There's no right. This is like not the kind of thing that you should actually worry about. This is the kind of thing that you should worry about if you're really obsessed by like some sort of purity part of it. And if this was about being kosher or whatever, that would make sense. But if it's just about like a more utilitarian thing, it doesn't make any sense. Also, although I have to say, like, the purity thing can be a motivator.
Sure.
Like. Like in the same way that like, if you're not going to drink, you should just like be like, I'm not going to drink, no drinks, not ever, no exceptions. Like that's a lot easier to maintain than a like, I will mostly not drink except sometimes. Or, same thing with diet, right? If you're just like, I'm going to go paleo. I know people like the cheat day, but honestly, it's a lot easier to just be like, there's no cheat days.
There's no cheat day.
This is a decision that I've made. And then, again, after being a vegan for 20 years, there's never a single second of the year that I sweat being a vegan because I've been doing it forever and I don't have any cheat days.
Or just live with no rules. Sometimes there might be a cigarette. Sometimes there might not be a cigarette. Sometimes you're not drinking, but other times there's a Paloma. Whatever. It happens.
Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law.
Yeah.
Right? Am I right? Brendan Milliken, Konnie Lukes is not running for re-election.
She is not.
And this has got me thinking about a question I was asking vis-a-vis like Tracy Novick running for election again, which is like, who is the most controversial yet effective politician in local politics of the last 10, 20 years? And it's maybe too hard to quantify. Like, there's maybe not a standout character who's like, well, it's obviously this guy. Like, it's too hard, but maybe it's not too hard to quantify. It seems to me, upon my first thinking, though, it is.
I think we just make it easy and say Jordan Levy.
But did he see the last 20 years?
When was he last mayor? I don't know how old I am now, Mike.
I mean, I think I'm slightly.
Does it have to be 20 years?
Why
don't we just say living? I think we should be living.
Sure. Okay, I could totally buy Jordan Levy.
Yeah, I think that's where it is. Because, Jordan was...
Remind people who he is, because most of the people listening to this were not born when Jordan Levy was mayor.
Really? Is that already? Is that young? Jeez. No, now he's a radio personality. You probably know him from
Lives downtown.
Lives downtown. He's an urban pioneer. But no, he was mayor for years. And... he had some very controversial stances. There's a lot of things that we just take for granted now, like the Centrum, DCU Center, opposed to. It was like a lot of big projects in the city that have definitely changed the way we view ourselves and our landscape that he tried to run opposition on for quite some years. But huge following, wildly popular, but also, he was loathed and loved at the same time. Like, if you're talking about controversy, I think he's the guy.
That makes sense. I mean, part of the reason I was thinking about this is just thinking about Konnie having been a locally elected political official for like 38 years, essentially 40 years. Like, in what sense can you say that of anybody in Worcester politics that she's the most responsible for like the face of Worcester in 2019? Because she's been working on it for 40 years. But in some ways, she hasn't been. In some ways, maybe she hasn't been that effective because she has been like frequently a lone voice of dissent,
sure,
and not a voice of dissent who's building enough of a groundswell of public opinion to actually get to turn that into being more than a voice. Like, all respect to being a voice of dissent, just maybe not figuring out how to turn that into political reality very often. At least not in my experience.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's one of the only things that I've ever had a problem with in the way, and if you're going to dissent just for the sake of dissent, right, then you're kind of buying in. It seems like you're buying into the routine that, the fix is in on everything. Everything is some giant conspiracy.
Just very fatalist.
And I feel as though that's a dangerous road to go down, right? Like, if that's the case, right, and to your point, there's only one dissenter, right? Like, but then we're just going to assume the fix is in on everything else. Shouldn't we just walk away? Like, why are we even pretending to care? I think it's probably healthier to acknowledge that sometimes things that appear to be big conspiracies where the fix is always in, it's actually just there are so few people involved in the process, it's going to look that way because it's the same people doing the same things all the time. And it's not because it's a grand conspiracy, it's because there's like 10 people involved. And I think it's almost a misinterpretation of the way civic life in Worcester that landscape actually looks and functions.
I also have to wonder, in trying to come up with with a quick, interesting analysis on this. The job of being a Worcester City Councilor is basically being a LARPing ombudsman. I really strongly feel this even more than ever. That the actual legislative part of the job is pretty small. The impact you can have legislatively is pretty small. The body, and never in my time in Worcester, has very particularly given any direction to the executive director of the city, which is to say the city manager. Mm-hmm. They basically just follow the city manager's lead. There's a little, and
then tell him what a great job he does every couple of years.
But that's their thing. They're just like, the city manager's doing fine. What do we have to worry? We'll pass the zoning thing. Maybe we won't. Maybe we'll ban pit bulls. Right. Maybe we won't. We'll just spend a lot of time doing other stuff. But being an ombudsman is really important. Mm-hmm. Like, I know this from going to public meetings. People are like, hey, I'm having this problem with the city, and people at the meeting shrug their shoulders, and the city councilor at the meeting is like, hey, I'll take care of that.
Yeah.
Like, I am a city councilor. I can call people up at DPW or whatever tomorrow and get this thing straightened out, whatever this problem is, or research this thing for you. Being an ombudsman is super important, and it's great to have ombudsmen who are actually held accountable at least every 2 years.
Again, so I guess this is, again, just this is where I get a little cynical in the other direction, where it's like the old adage, you can't fight City Hall. Mm-hmm. In Worcester, if you've got like 10, 20 friends, you could wreck City Hall, right? Like, I mean, both physically and like philosophically, right?
Yes.
It's not really a very powerful entity. It only appears to be that way because there's a very small number of people who are paying attention to it, right? And you're outnumbered in that capacity. But if we somehow convince the other 200,000 people residing in the city to become engaged, City Hall would not seem like such an overwhelming force as it oftentimes does. And I feel like sometimes that's where the ombudsman role comes in, where it's like oftentimes folks have problems with the city, and it comes from a place where there hasn't been a lot of engagement in the past. So there's like genuine confusion and concern about like, well, this is happening. I don't know how to deal with this. Who is the person that's going to help me navigate these waters and whatnot? Mm-hmm. Where oftentimes it's actually not that big of a deal. It just weren't paying attention for the first half of your lifetime.
Well, I also don't expect the average citizen to understand how things work in city government at all, because it's so rarely do you need to. Like, unless you're constantly dealing with permits, unless you're a developer or something, a contractor maybe, why do you need to know 99.99999% of how things are done in City Hall?
Maybe. Yeah.
This is even something we see in the activist community, right? Where like frequently activist campaigns start and engage with the city council in completely backwards ways that make no sense and just make the councilors irritated and have no chance of being effective. And eventually the activists involved figure out what's going on. Only rarely does an older activist see what's going on and step in to help them, which is what should happen, or a city councilor. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, also I feel like Konnie definitely ombudsman definitely LARPed it up, man. Like, especially in the LARPing style. Like, if you don't have that rogue character on the side, like the role playing game is not very exciting.
Yeah, no, but I guess this is kind of the point I'm getting at a little bit too. I think that some of the area, and I'm a fan of Konnie. We've been friendly for years. But I feel like that's some of the areas where that role fell flat, and it was because, in that ombudsman role, oftentimes it would be being the voice for somebody who was just wrong. Yes. I can think of this in terms of like
much of the time.
I can think of this in the case of like business issues in particular, where it would end up being protectionist to a fault, where a business that would otherwise be struggling, or whatever. Pick a scenario, and you kind of look at it like, okay, well, aren't we? you're simultaneously playing the role of the person who's fighting the man, but being protectionist of businesses, in a way that's treating them with kid gloves at the same time. You can't have it both ways, and I feel it fell apart a lot.
I do see that. I mean, I do. That was one thing that made me I would never feel like I was an enemy of Konstantina Lukes, but I definitely feel like I was never the kind of fan I would have liked to be, because I do feel like very frequently, like everybody else on the council would be embracing some popular but wrong perspective, policy, framing, whatever, and you would just, as a citizen of Worcester, you just be like, oh, why are you guys being such a bunch of dummies?
Food trucks is the one that comes to mind for me here. The food truck wars of the last decade, which nothing ever came of, really, right? Like we just, to your point earlier about how it's nobody really does anything; they'll just mull things over for a bit. Like we never really settled anything with our food trucks. We don't have a food truck industry. We've got a parking lot where we let a couple trucks show up every, but it's not
a little game.
It's not really a growth industry at all, and it's all because a bunch of older folks couldn't wrap their heads around something that younger people were asking for.
Well, I'll just say that I feel like frequently the city hall would be, or the city council would be embracing something which was popular but wrong, or popular enough but wrong.
Yeah.
And then Konnie would come in and say, I disagree. And I would be like, yes. And then she would say, I have a different perspective, which is popular but wrong. And I would be like, why are you doing this? You're just wasting the opportunity. There's nobody to root for now.
The one time, though, that she would always hit it out of the park would be, a lot of people don't realize this, that, Konnie used to be the local head of the ACLU.
Yes.
And there were a couple times, it came up once or twice, I think, during like Worcester's Occupy movement, where somebody would use a word that was normally only heard in that ACLU universe, like stifling regarding speech or whatever, or chilling regarding speech or action. And that's when you would always see her ears perk up. And, the conversation would change slightly. And even if it was a group of folks that she disagreed with, if you were making a good case that like your speech was being stifled or something was being done from a government perspective that was having a chilling effect on speech or action, that's where Konnie, you could light her up really, really quick. And I feel it's one of those areas that we didn't give her enough credit as a city councilor, because I think oftentimes her take on things was painted very broadly as being conservative or antiquated or whatever the case may be, not
just
fitting into
grouchy,
or just grouchy and not fitting into whatever any modern narrative or whatnot. But at its core, there was this genuine interest in making sure that even if she was going to scowl at you, you were going to be heard while it was happening.
Speaking of scowling, are you ready with this YouTube? So I want to end the show today by listening to Nat Needle's song, Even More Advice for Konnie Lukes. Nat wrote this song back when Konnie first became mayor. And this song, it satirizes the powers that be that were always scolding Konnie to be nice, especially when she was mayor. They were like, well, now you have to be nice. You have to like build consensus. And that's how you're going to be truly effective, not by being this outlier, not by being this grouch. And I would say that telling Konnie that like she needs to like become a glad-hander rather than a contrarian is like telling Tony Stark, like, Tony, the metal suit is not helping you, man. Take the metal suit off and you'll get a lot more done. Not true. Anybody who gives you that advice probably does not have your best interest at heart, Tony Stark or Konnie Lukes. I really appreciate that Nat was like, that Nat took this perspective, and that he wrote a song which is, I don't know, man. I feel like we don't have a lot of clever things or even nerdy things about Worcester politics. This is both very clever and very nerdy, and really makes a lot of sense if you knew who was on the council in 2007.
Yeah.
I don't think that an entire article in the Worcester magazine covered the extent of advice that Konnie Lukes needs. I don't need the 40 articles over the past few weeks in the Telegram and Gazette have managed to fully address the total degree of advice Konnie Lukes needs to succeed as mayor. I just don't think it's enough. I think that she just needs even more. So here it is. I think it's peachy keen that Konstantina B. Lukes gonna occupy the mayor's chair. Since Murray had to hurry off to climb that State House stair, Connie's promised a political takeover that'll keep us a creative city. But when she ruled out any personal makeover, well, I thought I better write this ditty. What I'm talking about is, please put down your dukes, Konnie Lukes. Gonna catch more flies with honey than with nukes. I like my Worcester mares to be comforting as prayers and never to be cool as cutes. So please put down your dukes, Konnie Lukes. I mean, won't you be more clubby, more shoulder rubby, a kind of senses builder? I'm so unsure, so insecure, round brash blonde battle maidens like Brunhilde. Won't you see what the boys in the back room will have and just go along to get along? Just a few more chuckles without the brass knuckles, and you'll have them all singing your song. What I'm saying is, please put down your dukes, Konnie Lukes. Well, let them mention your ascension is one of them flukes. I like my Worcester mares to be comforting as prayers and never to be cool as cutes. So please put down your dukes, Konnie Lukes. Now, poor Paul Clancy, he's getting kind of antsy. Phil Palmieri, he thinks you're scary. Jumpy Joe Petty, he's already unsteady. Mark Parado, every night he gets blotto. Even Sonny Kate Toomey is looking slightly gloomy. And smiling Irish Dennis, he seems haunted by a menace. Mighty Mike O'Brien is in his office crying. And young Jeff Smith thinks you the Lord of the Sith. Even good old Barbara, who would never ever harbor a grudge or budge from your side, says to deliver the goods to the neighborhoods. You ought to try some tricks you haven't tried. What I'm saying is, please put down your dukes, Konnie Lukes. Put them down, Konnie. When Rick Rushton wakes up in the middle of the night, he pukes. I like the Worcester mares to be comforting as prayers and never to be cool as cutes. Getting all this? Cause, please put down your dukes, Konnie Lukes. Now, Konnie, just lean back in your mayoral chair. Thoughtfully close your eyes. Purse your lips. Fold your fingertips. Act benevolent and wise. You know it's time to lean on someone else to be mean enough to fight that fiscal fight. And if Gary Rosen's the one you've chosen, you just have to teach him how to bite. You can do it. So, please put down your dudes, Konnie Lukes. If Steve Rush muffs your name, don't shame him with rebukes. I like my Worcester mares to be comforting as prayers, never to be cool as cutes. So please put down your dukes and take advice from bald guys playing